everyone, and welcome to Mindbody Insights, an interview series where I sit down with experts in the field of holistic health to increase awareness of our mind-body systems and to share practical tools that you can start to implement right away to see positive impacts in your life. My name is Kathleen Bosselman. I'm a yoga instructor and licensed massage therapist at Brooklyn Mindbody Collective, a wellness center offering complementary and holistic healthcare to our community while supporting one another's growth as practitioners. Today, I'm sitting down with licensed creative arts therapist Edna Grubman. Edna specializes in EMDR and somatic therapy. As a dance movement therapist, Edna integrates the understanding of how our bodies hold on to stress and trauma and weaves together somatic practices with EMDR to foster healing. Edna incorporates grounding techniques and practices from somatics, mindfulness, and yoga to soothe the nervous system. Hello, Edna. How are you today?
I'm great, Kathleen. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very excited to get to share your work with our viewers today. You're one of the newer members of the collective, so I'm excited to get the word out there and tell everybody a little bit more about what you do. So I think to start off, just to introduce your work, why don't you give us just a little bit of a rundown about your work and EMDR?
Sure. So, EMDR is a trauma-informed therapy. So, we look at the client and their history through a trauma-informed lens, meaning we look at everything that the client brings into the session with that lens. Trauma The trauma lens is a little bit different than just walking into talk therapy, as we're constantly trying to make the connection of how the client's coping mechanisms that were developed because of traumatic experiences are influencing them today, and to try to tease that apart so that we can help the client recognize which coping mechanisms are healthy, which are useful, and which they no longer need.
Yeah. And what sort of events or experiences would be considered trauma in this situation?
Sure. So there's lots of different kinds of trauma. So the big ones are things like a natural disaster or a car accident. Those are big traumas. Or
Mhm.
someone who was fighting in a war comes back with like a lot of trauma, right? Then there are other kinds of trauma. There's being involved in a relationship that's unhealthy and has created a situation that a person responds in certain ways just to protect themselves or feel certain things about themselves that aren't true, right? So in an abusive relationship, that's a traumatic experience. Trauma also includes growing up in a home where either a parent wasn't available emotionally, that can result in traumatic response, or was abusive, right? And there's also things like small t's. So, for
Mhm.
example, let's say you have a parent who's maybe a little bit more edgy, and something happens at the dinner table, like a glass of water spilled or something like that. And that parent yells at you, "What's wrong with you? What did you do? How can you do this? Get out, get off the table, get away from the table," right? And how that impacts a child and what that makes them feel about themselves. And if this happens a lot, then this person carries certain beliefs about themselves. I'm no good. I'm not worthy. I can't do anything right. Right. And so that those are considered small t traumas, and they build up
Mhm.
and they affect our self esteem and how we view ourselves in the world. If that same child had a parent who then came in and said, "Don't worry, so and so had a rough day. You're okay. It's not a big deal. It's just water." That same experience has such a different life inside that person, right? That person doesn't take on that negative belief about themselves. So if you've been in an environment where you've been talked to in a certain way or made to feel a certain way over time, those kind of experiences can also be looked at and worked through, right? Because that
Mhm.
really affects how we present ourselves and feel about ourselves in our lives.
Yeah, right. Um, we didn't really talk about this in advance, but what would you say could be a long-term effect of those kind of small T's? What would that look like for an adult?
So their coping mechanisms might they would develop in a certain way.
Mhm.
So let's say that person is has a job and they have a boss that's a little bit more aggressive. and can maybe it's just trying to say, I need you to put more effort into this. And that person will take it as a personal assault because of their previous experiences. And they might freeze, they might become anxious, they might not be able to get the project done, then they might not be able to advance in their career, so on and so on and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
In any
so,
relationship, they might be one that's always trying to please the other, just in case they get upset, just in case they get angry at me, and then they see that I'm not really good, I'm not really worthy of love, right? And so these can really be very impactful.
yeah. So the smallness does not indicate the scope of the impact.
Correct. So the
So
smallness often affects more of how I view myself, right? While an earthquake, it's not about me. It was an earthquake, and oh my God, my world fell apart. And, I no longer have a home, and dealing with those kind of stresses, which are outside coming in, versus the smaller T's like microaggressions, are the inner, they really shape who we are. And sometimes they're harder than to tease apart.
right. Yeah, that makes sense. And so through your work, how do you hope to change people's experiences later on in their life?
So we begin by just trying to understand which things might be triggering you, right? So a person will come in with what happened that week, and we can notice where they start to get really upset or really frustrated or whatever. They brought it in because it's bothering them. Then we can start to tease apart, okay, what's happening in your body? Where are you feeling it in your body? And can we get rid of that charge in your body? Because trauma is stored in the body, right? And if you're triggered and you're bringing up those feelings, it's harder to see what's in front of you because the body is responding as if you are in danger now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so
Yeah.
we have to take apart and first of all, just let the body calm down, let the nervous system settle. So we'll practice different ways of letting the body settle, letting the nervous system settle. So that when you talk about that specific incident, it's like, you get all upset and anxious, and then the part of your brain that thinks actually gets turned off and is offline.
Mm.
So how can you actually work on that process if your thinking brain is not active, right? So when your emotional brain gets turned on, your fight flight, the prefrontal cortex is no longer online. So first of all, we have to learn ways to calm the nervous system. So then we
Mm.
can look at a situation from a thinking brain, and then we can start to tear it apart. What about this is familiar? When did you feel this way about yourself? Can you think about a time or the first time you felt this way about yourself? Right? And then we start to tease things apart. Do you need to respond now in the way that you responded then? Is that serving you? You were a small child when that happened. You are a capable adult now. Do you need to respond in the same way? Or can we find a new way to deal with this? And by
Mm.
toning down, by quieting the nervous system, you have the capacity to think and tease apart and recognize in a way that you don't if you don't take the body into consideration.
Mm.
Yeah,
So,
I
with
can't.
the litany of different options for treatment and different modalities available, what would you recommend someone who's seeking to start therapy consider when they're choosing a therapist or a modality?
So it's really important to find somebody that you feel like you can connect with. That's first and foremost. So I would suggest doing some research on the different types of modalities available. There's somatics, there's EMDR, there's internal family systems. There are a few different ways of approaching this, right? A lot of therapists now are integrating a number of different ways of working, but first try to find out what you feel might work for you. And then I would suggest reaching out to therapists. You can find therapists on Psychology Today or through different websites and schedule a 15-minute phone consult and see who makes sense to you, who you feel connected to, who you feel. Actually, the first thing I would say is going back a step. When you speak to that person, do you feel safe?
Mhm.
Is their rhythm, their tone of voice, what they're saying to you? Does it make you feel safe or do you feel anxious? And if you feel any kind of anxiety at all, I would say call the next therapist, because the first thing in trauma therapy is you have to feel safe.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can't do the work. Your body will pick up on some sense of not feeling safe. Your nervous system will kick in, and you won't be able to do the work. So safety is first and foremost.
So it's really a process of checking in with your body as you're in those initial stages of meeting someone. Because that the core of the relationship between the therapist and client is really where the healing happens. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
very
All right.
important.
So to wrap up today, how can people follow your work? How can they work with you directly? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
So you can find me on Psychology Today or through Brooklyn Mindbody Collaborative website. I'm also on Instagram. You can find me also through Brooklyn Mindbody that way. I have a couple of reels on different ways that you can soothe the nervous system. So check them out and see if that might work for you.
We'll be sure to link all those things that Edna just mentioned in the description of the video. Edna, thank you so much for hopping on today. It was a pleasure to get to know a little bit more about your work and to share your work with everyone else.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye.